So we entered the final day of the Cheltenham Festival 2018 plus 31 points up from the official tips, and many hopefully no doubt maybe a few more points up on top of that if they'd have got fifth place on Turning Gold and maybe through some savers around on horses mentioned and some of the stats qualifiers and the micro angle qualifiers as well. We started the day, I suppose, yes, in good spirits. I was happy and willing to kind of bet 11 points on the day, which I sometimes do if I enter the final day kind of ahead, and to ensure that that would leave a kind of nice, decent festival profit of plus 20 points. Which is no bad thing on the week if the worst had come to the worst. We entered the final day, I suppose, with Mullins, Elliott, and the Irish and Davy Russell generally having dominated. Excuse me. And maybe I should have spent some more time musing, as I touched on in the last video, whether Skelton, Tizard, and Nichols may step up to the plate. I was nearly there. I nearly got to the point, I suppose, of thinking about them in more breadth and across the piece for the day. But of course, I am saying that mainly in hindsight, knowing full well what transpired as the day progressed. So, yes, there's the recap there as we end the day four. A kind of thanking the Lord for missed approach. I would have been a grumpy bugger had he not held on. There's the annoyance over the storyteller, the annoyance over Delta work. As I've said before, I am a restless perfectionist, but it's that kind of annoyance in myself, I suppose, and drive for perfection, which of course will never be achieved, but it's that drive and annoyance at not tipping the likes of the storyteller, not tipping the likes of Delta work, and that reflection that goes on after such winners that has made me had the best festival week that I have ever had, and that is why I do it, and that is why I talk as I do there, which may seem a bit miserable, I suppose, given the winners that we've had and the profit that I took into this day. But you can always be better, and I suppose you are only as good as your next winner, as some people would say. So that's that. We entered the final day. I'd spread across 11 points. You can see the tips there. I'll go on to it in a moment, but the county hurdle, Discorama and Blow by Blow are first and second there. One member put the forecast on 25 quid, I think, at 350 odd to 1 reverse forecast. So well done them. Dresden Santanderos, I'll get onto the Grand Annual last of all, obviously, and that kind of sadly provided a rather large sour note to the festival. Given the fact that 3 horses sadly lost their lives in that race. And then there was the bonus race, the Albert Bartlett, Kilbrick and Storm tipped, and Mulcahy's Hill tipped half a point each at 50s. I suppose I could jump straight to the Albert Bartlett because I won't overcomplicate this one. In 2014, when the last time, or the first time since I started looking at Cheltenham, 2014, in terms of blogging properly, I suppose 2014 was the first year it was soft, or certainly the Albert Bartlett was run on soft ground, or officially soft, and I tipped up on these pages in the free post, which you can probably find if flicking to March 2014 there. I would like to think it might be there somewhere. I tipped Very Wood at 50 to 1. I think half a point each way that day, or half a point win in the Albert Bartlett, and he duly obliged. And then a year later, or 2 years later, the Mags Mullins winner, who also ploughed through the mud and won at kind of 10-9 to 1, I think. So this is the only kind of novice race. Well, there's a national, yeah, it's the kind of only novice race I attack. That's not a handicap. There is obviously the Close Brothers novice handicap, and the only kind of graded race I attack, the only kind of grade 1 I attack all weeks from my target races in terms of tipping. For some reason I seem to do okay. Maybe it's because it's the extended trip and it's still looking at unexposed horses, which clearly maybe in my own punting I need to focus on more given how the week has gone. I'll jump to the Albert Bartlett. There's no overcomplication or some kind of brilliant form analysis with this particular race. The hard work was done long before, a couple of weeks before, in terms of in the research. My own unique stats profile from my stats package. You can see the write up there as per the video which I recorded as a preview for day 4. I have 10 from 10 stats in my stats portfolio for this race that all looked quite good actually. It's rare to have that many stats or me to use that many stats to make up a short list, but it certainly worked, and only 2 horses hit all 10, and I'm not going to pretend that I'm going to be some wild judge of a form of novice hurdlers, but they're generally unexposed, they're generally lightly raced, and form analysis is only useful to a certain point because clearly the majority of them are going to show more at some point, given the nature of their lightly raced profiles. And because they were both 50 to 1, I tipped them both. Now, in hindsight, obviously, given one hacked up, one of the main annoyances or the main annoyance from this day is having not tipped 1 point to win each. Albert Bartlett was the last race I looked at. I looked at and tipped in these 2 races up to about midnight or 12:30 on Thursday when I was absolutely shattered. I thought it best I dragged myself off to bed before I attacked the other 2. Then I looked at the Grand Annual and tipped, and then I realised, then I looked at the Albert Bartlett, and thankfully I had a point left from the 11 points or so that I was only willing to expand and bet. And clearly with hindsight, maybe I should have used an extra point and put an extra half a point on each, and we'd have been left with 19 points, or indeed tried to do and analyse the Albert Bartlett earlier on in the card, and we would have taken 1 point from one of these other 3 races and spread it over these 2 here, and I would have been 25 points better off on top of the 92 we made in the week, just for a simple staking change. Not even about missed winners, that is just simply staking, but possibly that is the only staking decision I got wrong all week, and maybe I'll live with it. So there we go. So yes, that's that. The county hurdle. Let's have a look. Those or various horses either hit my stats shortlist and formed a long list, or again, some of those horses hit my stats earlier on in the post, especially Whiskey Sour for Willie Mullins, and what was Paul Townend again, I think, or did he switch? I forget. But anyway, hit the Willie Mullins stat. He didn't have a great record going into the county, but it was misleading. He was 0 from 23 or so over the last 10 runnings. It was one of the few handicaps, and certainly handicap hurdles, that he hadn't won. He'd had 3 or 4 places in the top floor, but if you then, I looked through his record at horses that finished kind of in the top 8 or so, and I think that was around 8 or 9, so a good third of his runners in this race had actually ran with credit, and given the form he was in, given the odds of Whiskey Sour, I was more than happy to take a dabble. He kind of scythed through from the back and actually ran quite well. If I have a look at the race, and maybe we focus on some of the winners. Remeluk raced fairly handily. Again, he was an exposed horse, but in form, like the track, and outrun 50 to 1. I know a couple of people tweeted me on Twitter before the race saying, what do you think of him? And I rubbished his chance and said, surely something more progressive is going to win, which transpired to be the case, but he went very close and he ran a hell of a race. And a credit to Connections, he hasn't run a bad race all year. I talked myself out of the kind of JP McManus battalion. I'm not a big fan, actually, of when big owners throw a load of darts at a race, or indeed trainers. It can be a bit misleading, maybe, when you had the likes of Mullins, especially, threw quite a lot of darts at this race. And maybe that was a sign that as yet, sorry, I'm just... what am I thinking about? Oh, yes, we won't edit this video. Everything I've just said about Mullins' stats in the county hurdle, I was actually thinking of the Coral hurdle. I thought that sounded strange when I was saying it. That Blue Berry that I tipped, sorry, at 28 to 1 on the Wednesday, sorry. Yeah, those stats I just reeled off about him having a poor record in the county are actually referring to the Coral hurdle. But as an aside, that's just can be a useful example of how you should dig into the stats and not take them at face value and use them necessarily to dismiss a horse out of hand, especially trainer jockey stats, and especially those at this meeting, and especially when they're in the form that Mullins was in. So anyway, he actually has a really good record in the county hurdle. So ignore that. But yes, that point I was making then about Mullins throwing however many darts, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You know, him throwing 5 darts at this, maybe some indication that, you know, it wasn't that targeted, and the JP as well, and very much about hoping that one of them may go in. And as it transpired, that would be the case, because neither JP, with the many darts that he threw at it, and neither Mullins, with the many darts that he threw at it, none of them could do much and muster much either. So if we just focus on the winner, again, he had a similar profile. Bridget Andrews jumped on. This is the complexity of horse racing. Connections thought he would hate the ground. Harry Skelton thought the ground was questionable. But look at his profile. Very unexposed in handicap hurdles. If I click handicaps, you can see this. He was 0 from 4, 2 places. So we can already think he's likely raced as a handicap hurdler. One day he might show more. And we can look at his form. And I didn't. This is one of the few, the ones I've mentioned previously. When talking about the horse, I have thought about pre-race, and I have tipped on the odd one. What I'm saying to you now is very much a kind of after the Lord Mayor's show, because I didn't think about that pre-race. I very much did focus on some of the horses on my short list, and the Willie Mullins and the Elliott, in part from that error I've just touched on about not actually thinking about maybe this might be a day that the Irish don't dominate. Maybe this is a day that those trainers whose horses had run well may step to the fore. Skelton, Nicholls, Tizzard. Mohamed, why could we have found him? How could we have ended up on him? Well, he's unexposed in handicaps. He had decent novice graded form. Coming up again to the fore in a big handicap hurdle here at Cheltenham. Ran well behind Elgin. I mean, he came 5th in the champion hurdle, didn't he? And he ran with credit. The ill-fated Neon Wolf and OK running a grade 2 there. Taunton hacking up in the novice hurdles. You know, he's got wins over hurdles at least. Cheltenham form again. Was it in this race? Possibly. Yeah, I think it might have been. So he had form in the race. His handicap mark wasn't too far ahead, and given he was unexposed in handicap hurdles, you couldn't get het up about his handicap mark. Could he win from it? Couldn't he win from it? A bit of an unknown. But he had festival form there. The question was whether he would handle the ground. But importantly for him, he had not proved that he couldn't handle the ground. Certainly in hurdles. He'd hardly raced on soft, and certainly not in handicap hurdles, so it was impossible to make the judgment that he couldn't handle the ground. And maybe pre-race, because I did have a flick through all the runners in this, I should think I quickly jumped to the conclusion that he would not handle the ground, and that because Harry Skelton had jumped on another horse, that actually, he must have no chance at all. So that's a slap on the wrist, another thing to learn and try and absorb. Do not take jockey bookings at face value, certainly at this week. And when a horse is priced 20 to 1 or 25 to 1 or 33 to 1 and bigger, you can allow yourself to take the chance and overlook such things that you may perceive as negatives. And this one certainly had not proved that he didn't handle soft ground. Indeed, he'd run okay at Kempton behind Buvou Dare. He went on to win the champion hurdle, as we know. Kept on steadily. He ran okay. So actually, it was pretty impossible to say at this point in time that he definitely would hate soft ground and that he wouldn't handle it. So that's that. And interestingly as well, he had a bit of a break as well, and a gap, and Skelton had done that before, hadn't he? The year before, or whenever he won a handicap hurdle at last year's festival, was it the festival before that? He'd returned and brought one after a break. So again, that's interesting. I kind of think they may have been aiming him at air, and anything he did here may have been perceived as a bonus, but he's run with credit there, and he's run on strongly, and he has headway third, and he's kind of been up there as well. I don't think he's come from right out the back, has he? Again, I'd have to watch again to remind myself. So that was decent from Mohamed, and again, that similar kind of profile. I'll touch on Flying Tiger, who I was disappointed with. Maybe they'll try him at Aintree. He pulled his chance away. He looked an absolute picture before the race. I was rather bullish that he would go very close here. Festival form, I thought soft ground was fine, and he'd been running in graded hurdle form, a bit like the Irish do, as touched on that repeat profile that I keep hammering on about, especially in handicap hurdles. I expected much better, but I knew after the first half a mile, halfway through the race, that I was in trouble. He would not settle. Not 100% sure. They went at breakneck speed here. Remeluk was pretty much prominent early and stayed there. Mohamed was never far away and was actually put into a decent position by Bridget early enough on in the race, certainly by the halfway point. And he just failed to pick up. He used far too much energy in that ground, and he never got home. Yeah, I mean, he just didn't run well at all. I'm not sure they actually went fast enough for him. Maybe he just had an off day. Maybe he got buzzed up before the race. But from his handicap mark of 140, given that he won the Fred Winter off 134 and he's got another year on his back, another year of progression, he is still lightly raced in handicap hurdles, and surely he is going to hack up at something. Maybe Aintree, maybe Ayr, maybe Punchestown, but you'd like to think Nick Williams might aim him at something. A big field, a real fast pace would see him in a much better light. Discorama and Blow by Blow, I tell you, those two horses come up well on my stats for the race. I think Discorama in particular hit a couple of very niche angles, and one which had found quite a few winners from not very many runners in this race. And at 40 to 1, I was interested. And Blow by Blow, having missed, I think, one or two too many Gordon Elliott and Gigginstown handicap winners, at least two by this point, that I hadn't tipped. Maybe I was a bit annoyed. And I also had in my mind that I tipped the 25 to 1 winner of the Martin Pipe last year for Sane Connections. And I didn't want to miss out again this time. I was very pleased with how I read this race. I looked at it and thought it's a compressed handicap like a few had been. There is only, let's have a look, 8 pounds between the bottom weight and the top weight. I thought that this may actually, when in that scenario, it may actually come down to who is the best horse in the race. Will the best horse win? It may not necessarily be by who's got however many pounds ahead. And you can see that in terms of what they'd done today, Blow by Blow was one of the best in the race. Well, on ratings was one of the top two. And what did I want to look at? Excuse me. Again, looking at his profile, lightly raced in hurdles. Here we have him. What caught my eye with Discorama being high on my list was that Discorama had beaten Blow by Blow. And clearly a big field was good for him. Then Blow by Blow won a maiden hurdle last December, then January, a grade 1, again running in a grade 1, pitching them in a decent way to hide a handicap mark or true ability to run him in a race where he's actually not a grade 1 horse, I assume. Maybe he might develop it in time, but it's a good way to give them experience and to ensure the handicapper doesn't clobber them too much, although even so, actually, they might have just thought he might be a grade 1 animal, we may as well run him and see. And then it transpires that they hack up in a grade 3 at Thurles. I thought this stronger pace, bigger field might make him improve even more. He'd gone up 12 pounds, but that just shows you I do not tie myself up in knots over weights and measures. Generally, certainly not this week when it's more about profile and connections. I just thought he's won a grade 3 on what they've done to date. He's one of the best horses in the race. He arrives in form. We know everything about the connections. I wasn't bothered about the weight rise because my view is with that overall official rating, is that he has yet to prove he can't win from it, and therefore, because of all those other positives, at a double-figure price, I am more than happy to take the chance. And because if I like Blow by Blow, the last thing I will say, Gordon Elliott again. His handicap Davidson stats haven't come up there. But he does in general have a really poor record with handicap Davidsons, but this was his, one of 2 or 3, I think, at the Cheltenham Festival that won for him. So certainly handicap Davidsons at the Cheltenham Festival should be taken very serious for Gordon Elliott, even if they shouldn't for the rest of the year. So that's an aside. But if I fancy Blow by Blow, I had to fancy Discorama, and Blow by Blow didn't appear on my actual race trends and stats for this, but plenty of other reasons to like him as discussed, and he hit many other micro angles that I'd researched. And Discorama, I should finish. If I liked the fact Blow by Blow, I kind of had to like him and wondered why he was nearly 4 times the price, or certainly, sorry, just over 3 times the price. This was his first run in a big field race since winning a big field at Fairyhouse. Very lightly raced, unexposed, handicap hurdle debut. I was thinking again, will he's already shown good form in the big field. Will he enjoy the big field, the strong pace, the hustle and bustle? Which he didn't. If I fancy Blow by Blow, I had to fancy him each way. It's rare that I just put up 2 horses within a festival tipping race, as you have seen, and maybe moving forward, when I put only 2 in the future, I should maybe have a little nibble at the reverse forecast, because it would have been 340 odd to 1, and even £2.50 on that, and a £5 bet would have been very, very nice indeed. But that's just a bit of fun, and I hardly ever play forecasts and reverse forecasts, but maybe, and it's happened before in tipping races when I fancied 2 horses, them coming first and second, and I suspect if every time that I tip in a race, whether it's my members' notes or whether or not it's my free tips and comes as 3 mile plus handicap chases, I've got a feeling if I did a cheeky little reverse forecast and each time I only tip 2, I should think my bank balance might be quite a bit bigger, but that's something for me to work on moving forward. Again, just for fun. You can never be bullish and confident clearly about getting the 1-2 in a 24 runner festival handicap hurdle. But anyway, I was quite pleased with that. I still don't know if Robinson, if he should have won the race. Blow by Blow got a very, very easy lead, which clearly did help, but many of these other horses tracked him. Discorama came from right out the back, but Blow by Blow, yes, he was going a slow pace and the horses were sat back off him, but nothing got near him. So yes, he got an easy lead, but it could be he was just the best horse on the day, and yes, he was able to dictate, but there was nothing else bar Discorama that came out to chase him. Nothing else kind of got close, and he just kept on going. Discorama, it would have been, ideally in an ideal world, he may have raced him and got him a bit closer a bit sooner and not used up so much energy closing. There's a chance he could have at least got alongside Blow by Blow, and we really could have seen who the best horse on the day was. And clearly I would have liked it to have been a reverse, because it would have been kind of an extra 40 points or so, which would have been nice. But I'm not going to beat the jockey up too much, given that how all of the others that ran close to the pace, they all faded back and did nothing at all. That could be because they just weren't suited to race conditions, and they just weren't good enough on the day. But arguably, there's a case to be made that Robinson actually, given how everything else ran behind him and their position in the race, a case could be made that he did achieve the best possible position for the horse, also in the context that Blow by Blow wasn't stopping, and he looks an absolute tank of a horse, really big, and just ploughed through the mud with 11 stone 10 on his back. Possibly a horse to follow in time, especially over fences, as Giggleston like to send all of their horses one day if they can. Discorama, maybe slightly better ground, maybe an even stronger place, maybe a bit more of a positive ride, but he settled in well. The horse ran his race. Ideally, I'd have liked him to have been mid-division. Ideally, I'd liked him to have been closer when he started his challenge and got the horse into top gear, because as I speak to you, I'm in a case of I just don't know. But that's racing, and I'm happy with the 21 or points or so that I won on the race, having advised a rare 1 point each way bet on Discorama, because he was 40 to 1. There were kind of 4 places, 5 places, and I thought, well, why not? It'd be silly not to if that one placed. So that's that race, and then we got onto the Grand Annual, which I won't focus on for too long, really. It was quite a sad and demoralising end to the week, I suppose, with losing North Hill Harvey. Some plan went as well, didn't he? And dear old Dresden, who I tipped at 40 to 1 and got backed into 14s, and he kind of clattered down at the first. I think he then brought down North Hill Harvey, possibly. To lose 3 horses in any race is awful. To lose it in a race like this is particularly particularly awful, particularly bad, and clearly led to some searching questions being asked. And I believe the BHA are going to review the circumstances. I don't know whether the pressure and jockeys and trainers pushing their horses a bit too hard. Whether or not they went too fast on what would have been awful ground by this time, who knows? But yeah, it was a sad end. We won't dwell on that for too much longer. But it is important to dwell on it, because clearly, first and foremost, it's our love of the animals and our love of the sport which drives us all, or it certainly should do. What do I want to touch on? My horses didn't really run well. I do think some plan was lost, and I tipped him as well. He was running well until he got hampered by a loose horse in front of him at the second last. I think he was unsighted, the poor boy, and he just walked straight through it. Who else do I want to mention? Well, I should really mention the winner, Le President. He was high up. If I scoot down, I should point out while I'm saying this that not many of the stats in section 3 of my various pointers had much luck on the Friday. Again, that hammered home the point of using them as starting points, actually, and just added information and added layers. What do I want to say? The 5:30, the initial stats shortlist left those horses you can see there. Dolos and Some Plan actually came out really strongly against against various other stats that I used, and because of the number of ticks against the trends, I kind of felt I couldn't ignore them, I suppose. And they were both, well, Dolos was certainly unexposed, and Dresden was just a silly price, as that transpired to be, and it's a shame he couldn't get round. What do I want to say? Dolos just found the experience far too much. I thought he might enjoy the bigger field. I thought his jumping had been decent to a point in small fields, but here he rocked up in a big field. Unlike hurdlers, this is an unexposed chaser, rocked up in a big field, having only had small field experience, and he just kind of started making errors. I'm not sure whether it was the track, the ground, or whatever it was, whether this, well, it certainly was too much for him. He is a handicapper to watch just because he's very lightly raced, and Nicholls will find decent races for him, and maybe needs a conditions event or a smaller field. It does kind of hammer home his profile is very similar to that of the Storytellers, and it does just hammer home, I suppose, just how well the Storyteller did, given his profile of being lightly raced in small field chases, being pitched into a festival handicap chase, and all that comes with it. So Dolos is one that I'll keep on side. Coincidentally, I'll be trying to track, and I need to enter all of the horses that I tipped in my tracker, especially all of the unexposed ones, because in theory, at some point, they should prove better than their handicap marks, given their very, very, very lightly raced profiles. So that'll be something for me to keep an eye on, and we shall see how many of them get on their next 3 starts. The final thing I will mention is Le President, who I left in bold. Although in fairness, it seems like I had most of the field in bold in this race. Oh yes, and the other 2 Nicholls horses looked of interest. I had a good look, but dodged them. Le President, ooh, Bovril. I can't back every horse in the race. I won't say whether I did have a little nibble. It got to this stage, as it always does with the Grand Annual, and if you're anything like me, I ended up throwing darts all over the sodding shop, especially because we'd had quite a good day and quite a good week up to this point. So Le President, I did look, and I'm a bit annoyed, because what I did underestimate was just how testing this ground may be by then, by the time this race was run. I thought his extra stamina was actually a positive, but I did kind of think he might get outpaced. But this is another example of a chaser arriving in form and who had course form over fences. He'd run, and festival form, so he'd run okay in this race, getting outpaced over 16 furlongs on good ground, but at least, you know, he'd got festival experience and everything that came with it. He then, at the start of this season, chased home Foxtail Hill in a decent run, but that was on good. He disputed second, he ran well there, so actually on that basis, to come to the conclusion that he might get outpaced on 16 furlong on soft here, given he hadn't really there, was a bit stupid. They then stepped him up in trip again at Cheltenham. Chased home Splash of Gin, should actually run well on a race before. In the week, which I should have taken a bit more note of maybe. Again, he ran really well here, and he stayed on, and he was in solid, decent form. And then we had the other race at Cheltenham before Christmas, where he was running well and was going to go fairly close, I think. And he was making his move before he stumbled badly 3 out, never recovered, and soon beaten. So there was an excuse for that. And then we've got Paul Nicholls, who hadn't really had a winner this time in terms of when I analysed the race. By this point in the day, he had won the Fox Hunters Chase. And then we have Le President, given the 90-day break, knowing full well that actually the odd range to back JP McManus horses is when they are 9 to 1 or shorter. He was 14 to 1 in the morning. That's quite a big price to hope that he would get backed, which he was. He had 90 days off. Clearly this was a plan, especially because he'd run in the race last year. He got his soft ground. There was high chance of there being plenty of pace on the pace map, and at 14 to 1 he should have been probably higher up in my thinking. In hindsight, I would have substituted him for Dolos because he had more experience. He had Cheltenham Chase experience, but I went for the one that ticked more of my race stats and actually ticked more and was a bit more unexposed. That turned out to be an error, but I'm saying that in hindsight, and I really shouldn't be beating myself up too much about that. I know in my own mind that I was quite close to picking him, so I will live with that, and I will take that positive. So that was Cheltenham done and dusted, and I will add some notes below, just to kind of things I learned, and actually to have a record in writing, as it's, tried to get a good mix between me babbling on these videos and actually some written word that we can refer to in the future. But then the final, the kind of icing, or the cherries on top of the cherries, on top of a rather largely iced cake, was the Midlands National, which I always include in the festival subscription for Festival Week. And this is only the second year I've done a kind of Festival Week and paywalled it, but it is very draining and quite a lot of hard work. The Midlands National I always include is probably actually now, after having found a winner this year, my favourite national, because I found the winner a couple of years before. Gooniella, 3 or 4 years ago, he actually saved my Festival Week from it being 0 or +1 point, and actually we ended up on +10. And last year, Chase the Spud I managed to pluck out at 22, 25 to 1 for him to give us a boost on the Festival Week as well. So we were kind of 69.5 points going up into Midlands National. There were some trends and there were some stats, but like the Festival Week, I had to treat them with caution. This race this year was being run on heavy ground. The Midlands National in 20 years has only been run 4 times on officially heavy, I believe, or was it the last 10 years? And I think it was the last 20. So I was cautious not to kind of be too dogmatic. In any case, my stats profile pointed to 3. I was happy to leave 2 of them. Western Climate had a good profile for the race in terms of stats, and actually had an interesting profile as a horse, so I was most bullish on him for those 2 reasons combined. 1.5 win, nothing wrong there, he was poor. And then I looked at 2 bigger horses in a race full of exposed handicappers who might actually be interesting. I say that in the context of Billy Bronco, who was could be anything unexposed. He is one to track. He travelled up really, really well up until about 2 out. He side through the field. I thought he was going to come all the way and romp to victory, but then he just cut out. I'm not sure if he had a breathing issue. I'm not sure if he bled. I'm not sure if the stamina from nowhere just kicked in and he went, whoa. But he's one to watch. I'm not sure if that was a problem or what, but he looks like, well, he definitely stays 3 miles. On that evidence, he definitely stayed kind of 3-2. So he'll be an interesting one to track because he's very, very unexposed. He jumped well, he travelled well, and Evan Williams is just getting into form now. So one to watch there in Billy Bronco. Regal Flow was simply a case of backing a horse in the top of his game. I remember I tipped him earlier on at the season at Cheltenham when he came 3rd, I think. I remember reading Bob Buckler's blog, and he it said that the horse had strengthened up, he'd improved, he was the best he'd ever had him. Clearly he'd got him from Caroline Keeble kind of a season or 2 before. He'd had some decent form in Class 2s at Cheltenham, and he arrived here on the back of 2 wins, 2 or 3 wins, I think 2. The last one at Taunton, 5 days before the race, where he absolutely hacked up. I'm not sure what he beat. He was up against a load of old boys who were a bit out of form, but he won as if he was just on a kind of gallop at home. Quick little squeeze, away he was gone. I thought 25 to 1, that was me being in the zone and having read everything quite well all week. Form is a funny thing. I don't know how you mentally get into the place I got last week, but everything just seemed to click pretty much. And I just looked at that and he jumped out. How is an informed handicap chaser and an informed long distance chaser. You can't underestimate a horse arriving at the top of their game in these races. He was a prominent racer, a fairly prominent racer. He jumped well. He just run his best race ever, arguably, in terms of ease of victory, having tried 3.5 miles for the first time. Now we step him up a bit more. Is he absolutely going to relish this trip? At 25 to 1, you roll the dice. That was a silly price in the morning. And I'm glad I went with my instinct. He fell down on a load of stats. But again, that's where over the last couple of years, I've learned to be a bit more flexible. So that's that. So that ended up, as you can see there, 13 races tipped in, 6 winners plus 92 points. My best punting week ever. My best Cheltenham Festival ever, and I will be doing my best to apply many of the things that I've touched on in this video. I'll try and kind of pull them down into a kind of fact sheet or some bullet points. All of those things combined, everything worked well this week, and I will try my best to implement them, think about them, and improve my punting even more as we move forward through the jump season, the flat season, and background to festival time next year. So I hope you have enjoyed this rather long, I know, rather extended video series, but fingers crossed you've found some of the content useful and you've picked up the odd snippet. I hope I've kind of gone through in some kind of enthusiastic tone, I suppose, and you haven't found it too boring to listen to. Although if you have, I dare say you are not listening to the words I'm saying right now. So if you've cut all the way through, if you've watched all 4 videos, then give yourself a pat on the back. Have a stiff drink. I will add some thoughts below this video and some notes. And with that said, this is Josh saying, I hope you found that useful. Thanks for watching. I hope if you didn't join us on Festival Week 2018, you may join us in Festival Week 2019. And there is, of course, always the £7 trial for 7 weeks, and you can try the Members Club but the purpose of this video isn't to sell, it's to look back and reflect. So I will leave that there as this one ticks around to 36.5 minutes. Thanks for watching. Take care. And until the next time, this is Josh saying bye for now.